Okay, welcome to our Wake Up Clovis program today, brought to you by the Clovis Chamber of Commerce. And I always like to welcome, before we introduce our guest, welcome and thank our sponsors. So we have Clovis Community College as a sponsor. Thank you. The City of Clovis, Sagasser, Watkins, and Wheelan, PC, and Guardian Accounting. So thank you to those great companies for helping us put on our Wake Up Clovis program today. If you happen to be interested in being a sponsor, please reach out to me at greg@clovischamber.com. Because we will at the end of this, we'll have some exciting news on our next Wake Up Clovis program, and as we go into a live in-person format, and Jenna Welch, our communications director, will talk about that. So Tiffany Harris has lived almost her whole life in the Central Valley. She received her bachelor's degree in psychology and her master's degree in industrial and organizational psychology, but counseling was not in her future. Tiffany had a passion for human resources. After traveling for 7 years throughout the United States, following her husband during his career in football, Tiffany settled down with her family in Tulare, California. In 2017, she, with her business partner, started an HR consulting business, and in 2019 purchased a well-respected 50-year-old established company, Pacific Employers. Since 2019, Pacific Employers has created a full-service division to provide more hands-on experience to clients and has just launched a payroll division in an effort to help serve employers with their payroll concerns, as the state of California is one of the most stringent in the country for wage and hour obligations. Please welcome Tiffany Harris of Pacific Employers. Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Greg, for that introduction. And thank you so much to the Clovis Chamber for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you all about some of my favorite things, which are very important to each and every one of your organizations. Hiring the right employees for your the positions that you're hiring for and for your organization as a whole will be one of the most important decisions that you'll make. In addition, having an employee handbook that not only covers all of the policies and procedures that you need to have in order to be compliant, as well as having a handbook that has compliant policies that are not illegal. And you'd be amazed to know shocked to know maybe at the number of organizations that we talk to that they've done everything right and they just don't realize some of their policies and procedures are not actually compliant with state law. As Greg mentioned, California is one of the most stringent states to do business. So I'm sorry to all of you for being in the state of California. It's a beautiful state, but it is so difficult to do business. So that's why we're here to help. I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share, and I am going to start this. There we go. Okay. So we've already done the introduction, so there's no need to do any more of that. When I was creating this program, I wanted to go over the at-will status. And that is because in the state of California, we're an at-will state, but so many employers don't really know what at-will actually means and don't often realize that they're potentially jeopardizing their at-will status by saying certain things. So in order to have these compliant policies and procedures, I thought it was important for you guys to know what at-will actually means. So as you can see on this screen here, this is something that we actually put in all of our programs so that employees are constantly reminded that their employment is at will. Now, if you have contractual agreements with your employees, that is different, and at will is not as much in place. But because California is an at will state, the at will status itself means with no specified term. So if you have an individual, for example, who joins your workforce, the employee and the employer has a mutually agreed upon decision that there is no specified term that the individual will be with the company. So an employee can decide 2 weeks into their job that they don't like working here and that they're going to leave in the middle of their shift. And there's nothing that you can do. They can walk off the job and they are at will. And that means that you can't hold them hostage. You have to let them go. You're going to give them their final paycheck and you have 72 hours to do so, but you do not have the obligation and you don't have the ability to hold them in that position. By that same token, you as the employer do not have to have an employee be with you for any specified term. That means if you don't like the performance that the employee is doing in the workplace, if you don't think that they're a right fit for the position that you hired them for, or if you've just decided that you don't have the ability to continue paying the individual, for example, you can let them go with or without cause and with or without notice. Now, at will is a very slippery slope. And the reason being is the state of California has so many protected areas that the employee has. So if you have, I'll get phone calls sometimes from our clients and they'll say, well, I have this laundry list of reasons that I want to let this person go. They did this, they did this, they did this. And I'm listening to the call and I'm like, you have a lot of reasons that this individual should not be with your company anymore. And they'll say, yeah, so I'm just going to let them go at will. And my first question to them is, well, why are you releasing them at will when you have a whole list of reasons that you could say that you don't want them with your company anymore? And they'll say, well, I just don't want to have that awkward conversation. I just rather release them at will. So my challenge back to that client is, if you release them at will, it allows for the employee after the fact, who will be disgruntled because they just lost their job, to say that they were fired for reasons that were protected by law. Not always, but they have the ability to create a narrative that's not actually there. So you want to make sure that if you are releasing someone, if you have a for-cause reason, that you state that. That way you're not fighting a battle with something that didn't happen, with a group of attorneys that are looking just to get a quick dollar. And you know it didn't happen, but you have to defend it. So you don't necessarily want to use the at-will status as a release. I never recommend it ever, but we are an at-will state. And you don't want to jeopardize your at-will status in your handbook, in your employment ads, or in any other way that you're communicating with your employees. So some of the at-will items, taglines that I'm like, oh, I see it and I'm like, you can't have this in your handbook. And it's awesome that I think from a cultural standpoint in organizations, there's been a shift of a more like group, community and team building, and we're a family. And I love that. I love that that is where we have shifted to, but you have to be careful in language that you don't say things that are insinuating to the employee that they will have this long-term relationship with you. If you do that, you are jeopardizing your at-will status. So when you're looking at your employee handbook, you want to make sure that you're not saying things like what you see on the screen here, which is permanent employment, or even in your employment ads online, let's say. You don't want to say, hey, join the family, because it may insinuate that you're expecting them. You're not kicking out family members. You're expecting them to be with you for a long time. And when they took that job with you instead of with someone else, it's because they thought that they were going to have a longer relationship in terms of employment with you. Now, doing the at-will status. Oh, actually, I wanted to mention in your employment ads, there's also a a section regarding the like bio of what you provide in your employment ads, you want to make sure in those that you're not putting any language in. Sometimes I'll tell our clients, just send me what you're putting on there, because once it's out there, someone can take a picture of it, they can screen cap it if it's on their app system in their phone, and it's there forever. So you want to make sure of the language that you're putting in there, you make sure you don't say anything that is going to allow for the employee to believe that they have a longer relationship with you than they may actually have. So now that you guys kind of have an understanding about at will, let's talk about the actual hiring process. One of the most important decisions that you will make is who is going to be in your workforce with you. Now, you'll see this chart here on the screen, and it starts with recruitment. From there, you move to the applications. Let's say you're putting a job posting online. You're going to get a number of applications that go through. You've got to sift through the hundreds of maybe thousands of potential applicants that will just click the button and say, I want it. I want that job. I want that job. Maybe they're not qualified. Maybe they just are looking for anything that they can, and maybe there's no reason that they should have applied for that position because you put the list of all these things that they needed to have in order to be eligible for this position, and yet they still applied anyway. So you're going to sift through those applications, and of the filtered applications, you're going to do a series of interviews potentially. Hopefully you have a lot of good applicants. Then you'll have potentially a lot of interviews. We had a job posting a while back, and we had a lot of applications come in. We narrowed it down. We scheduled, of the people that we called, we scheduled 10 interviews. And we do a really good job, I think, filtering through who we think will actually be a good fit for our organization. And you guys want to know how many people actually came to their interview of the 10 that we scheduled? 0. We had not one person show up to the interview, and we were like, what are we doing wrong? But that is part of this process, going through and picking the right people. And you know what? It was a long-term blessing. If you weren't going to show up for the interview, what would you have been like in employment if we had chosen you to be the employee with our organization? So from the interview process, you're going to have your candidates, who are the final individuals that you are, or one individual, if you're only hiring for one position, job. Then you're going to give that individual a job offer, or more than one person if you are going to be hiring more than one person. And from there, obviously, they have their first day of work. Now, what does that recruitment process look like? Who can you use as a platform to get new employees for your company? You can use current employees. And what I mean by that is, this happens very frequently in the ag industry. A milker, for example, doesn't show up to work, doesn't call out, but now you need someone who can come to work right now. And so you've got to hire someone new if you don't have a relief person. And current employee says, hey, I know someone. We can call right now. They will come. They know what they're doing. They're really good. They've worked for a dairy before, et cetera, et cetera. And so they say, you know what? Call your friend. Tell him to come on over. We're going to hire him tonight. That does happen frequently. It's not ideal, obviously, because in those circumstances, you didn't really get that free employment opportunity to kind of interview and make sure that they were the right fit, but it does happen. You can also have a number of interviews happen, and you just haven't found the right person, and someone that you know in the workplace says, you know what, I actually know someone. I know someone who would be really good for this position, and here's why. And honestly, that sometimes ends up being some of the best situations. So you don't want to rule that option out. It's a good option. You can get it from other employers, network opportunities. You can meet someone and just say, you know what, that person would be a really good fit for our company. And that's a good avenue to choose. There are different avenues such as educational institutions. So for example, you guys that are up in Clovis, Fresno State might be a really good choice in figuring out or doing a job posting. You'd be amazed at how many different jobs, as a former Bulldog, go Dogs, I would see even just walking on campus about different jobs that were open on literal bulletin boards. So you can do job postings that way too. And you may get someone who's really hungry to show what they've got. They're ready to start their career. They're just finishing their education, and they may be a really good option for you. Some of the less common avenues are the newspaper. It's a more maybe old-fashioned way is you would look at the newspaper, what job ads are available, but it's not something that doesn't still happen today. There are still job opportunities that are posted in your local newspaper. And then magazines. That's a really rare, but the former owner of the company, his name's Dave Miller. He's fantastic. And he would be so mad if I took magazines out of the potential recruitment slide option. So in the job ad posting element of this program, I was going back and forth on whether or not I wanted to add this in. And the reason that I decided to go this route is because some of you may be on and may have 15 or more employees. If you do have 15 or more employees, this is new this year, and it's important for you to know. You have an obligation in your job posting to post the pay scale for the position that you're hiring for, if you have 15 employees or more. So you want to make sure to put the pay scale in. And in fact, if you're using one of these like third-party, very, very common job seeking websites such as ZipRecruiter is a very common one, they will actually have a question on the platform itself that says whether or not you have 15 or more employees. If you do, then it will require for you to put in the pay scale for the job that you are posting. So just make sure that you do that. Some of our clients, when this came down the pipelines last year and we knew it was going to hit, were really worried about what they needed to post. Do we have to say all of our employees' wages? I thought we weren't allowed to do that. You're not. You don't have to do that. Just what you would reasonably expect to pay for the position that you're hiring for. So it's not anything overcomplicated. It's just something that you need to know if you are going to do a job posting and your company has 15 or more employees. And in reality, if you have less than 15 employees, it doesn't hurt to put the pay scale. You're more than likely going to be asked at some point or another what they can an applicant can reasonably expect to be paid for the position. So employment applications. If you're doing that online job posting, like I said, it is not uncommon for an individual to still have to complete an application for employment. And there's nothing wrong with having that. You should have an actual application. If you don't, you can email me. We have a template that I can create, look similar to this, that would have your company's name on it in the event that someone came in or that you received an individual's resume and you wanted them to complete a specific set of information so that you had that criteria available and disposable to you. Some of the things that you do not want to ask, if you do applications on your own and you are looking at your current application, you want to avoid certain things because certain things used to be acceptable and they're just not anymore. So criminal history, it's a very slippery slope, and there's such minimal that you're allowed to know in making a decision as to whether or not an individual is going to be your new hire. So you don't want to ask about an individual's criminal history on a application for employment. In addition, you don't want to ask previous salary. This is so common. It's so common on our from our clients. They'll send us their application that they're using, and I will immediately do a name change on our application and send them a new one and ask them not to use it anymore because it asked the previous salary. That goes in line with something you don't want to ask during a job interview as well. You don't want to know what they've previously made in another job. It's not legal. You're not allowed to know it. Another thing that's not on this slide, but is something I always tell people is because it is very common, is date of birth. People will ask on an application, what is your date of birth? And you don't want to know that because then you know the individual's age, and age is a protected class. So if you know an individual is over the age of 40 and you bring them, you have them fill out the application, and then you happen to hire somebody else and they know a little bit about labor law, they could speculate that the reason they didn't get the job is because they had to put their date of birth and they were over 40 and you were discriminating against their age, when in fact, someone was just maybe more qualified and that's why they got the position over that individual who was over the age of 40. So you don't want to put things that are going to jeopardize and add liability to your company. Okay. The pre-employment inquiry guidelines. So where I was saying in an interview, you don't want to ask those things. This is kind of a cheat sheet that you see on the screen, and it gives the different items, for example, that you may want to inquire about before you hire someone on. You'll see on the right-hand side, there's an acceptable, you can ask these things, and then an unacceptable on the other side. We have actually, this is more of a dated form. I was going through the inquiry guidelines, and where this is like a one page, I just kind of did the front page of it. We actually have now 5 pages of pre-employment inquiry guidelines. And I will say, where a lot of times you could ask certain things, you can see in certain sections, it's literally where the acceptable line is, it's none. And that's because you can't ask. You can't know things that are going to bias your opinion in the hiring process, and something that is more than likely protected by law. And that's where it stems from. You cannot know. You cannot inquire about these things. Some of the big don't asks. Don't ask about disabilities, whether or not they have a problem with drugs or alcohol. I know that sounds like common sense, but you'd be amazed at how many phone calls we'll get about, well, I just did this interview and I asked them if they had a drug or alcohol problem. And I'm like, why you did? Why did you ask that? That you cannot ask that. So you want to make sure that you don't inquire about things that is going to be potentially protected by law. You would think, okay, a drug or alcohol problem. Well, they can't be doing drugs or alcohol in the workplace. We have a work-free or a drug-free workplace, which is true, but you can't inquire about their usage because addiction can be a disability. And so if they are addicted to a drug or alcohol, you can't inquire about that in the application process. You also don't want to ask if accommodation is needed. Where I will tell you this is very, very common is in the pregnant employee realm. Individual comes in for an interview and you can visibly see that the individual is expecting. Do not inquire about that individual's pregnancy. Pregnancy is a disability, is seen as a disability, and you cannot discriminate against an individual who is disabled. So whether that be temporarily or otherwise. So you don't want to ask, oh, well, are you going to need accommodation for that? What accommodation should we be making? Once that individual is with your company and onboarded and they come to you and say they need accommodation on some level, then you can navigate that. You don't speculate that an accommodation is going to be needed automatically. Now that we've gone over some of the nuts and bolts of the application process, and you get to that end point that I showed you on the chart, you have a new hire. So what are you going to do with that new hire? You're going to onboard them. And onboarding an employee has a number of different elements that come with it. You can see here this hiring checklist, which our organization has created as a cheat sheet, because there are so many things that have to be done in the onboarding process. And the bolded items that you see on the screen are items that are required by law. You will see the little asterisks next to several of the boxes. And that is because if it's bolded and has an asterisk, it's only applicable to those organizations who are actually utilizing those things. For example, there's a commission agreement. Not all employers have commissioned employees. So obviously it's not, you wouldn't need a commission agreement for individuals who are not actually being paid commission. But this hiring checklist is a great tool. What we do for all of our full service clients, as well as our staff, what we use in all of our files, is have this on the front sheet. The reason being is because you have very clearly easy access to when was this employee hired, what is their name, and the day that you completed each and every one of these checkboxes. In addition, that second section that you see that is kind of separated, those are handouts that go directly to the employee. That tells you, yes, we did give that pamphlet. Yes, we did provide them with this information. And then you have that in the front of the file. And you know, when you're looking at that front of the file, that all of your forms thereafter are going to be in that packet. Okay, so you want to make sure, if you don't have something like this, I highly recommend that you put something like this in your employee files, and just have it be your cheat sheet in the front that gives, and it just makes everything a lot more organized. If you need this, I'm more than happy to distribute it. I can even give the checklist itself to the chamber if you guys want afterwards, and you guys can distribute it if you guys want to. So some of the hiring documents, as you would have seen in that previous slide, include a number of different bolded items. The three that I mentioned here are all in that bolded section: the I-9, the W-4, and the notice to employee. The I-9 that you are currently using, all of you employers out there, if you look right now, you will see that your current I-9 that you're using for new hires is expired. It expired in October of 2022. But don't worry, you're in luck. The USCIS is behind and has not updated the new I-9. So if you were to go to the USCIS website right now, it would say that the current I-9 is to continue to be used until they provide an updated version. This is very common, but I will tell you, once they release the new version, they're going to say that it was created and completed in November of 2022. So just be prepared for that. I always screenshot things. So I'm like, don't try to tell me after the fact that you have an updated form, because you didn't all the way. And we're now in March and they don't have an updated form. I've checked. I check every single day. I know, I'm an HR nerd. The W-4 is, everyone knows what a W-4 is. You're gonna complete it every time when you are getting a new job or when you're, as the employer, onboarding a new employee. Every year, the federal government comes out with a new W-4. So from year to year, you need to make sure, because we have so many clients, you guys, who will give us their hiring packet. Here's our hiring packet. We are so on the ball. We are so organized. And I'm like, you guys go. I open it up. Why is your W-4 from 2017? Because we just keep the same packet. Yes. So all of your new employees, our employees that we hired in 2020, they all have a 2017. Our employees hired in 2022, they have a 2017. And as you guys know, I know all of you know that the W-4 changed pretty drastically a little ways back, and it's no longer your dependents, it's a dollar amount, which confused a lot of employers and employees alike. You do need to make sure that you update your W-4 every year in your hiring packets. That doesn't mean that you have to give the employee the opportunity to fill out a new W-4 from year to year. But if the employee says, I don't have any changes, I'm good to go, from a taxation standpoint, I don't need to update it, then you don't have to update your W-4. You have your employees, I should say, update your W-4 year to year, unless they have changes. So, and then the notice to employee, it covers a number of different things. It covers the actual location, the hiring location, where an employee needs to go, the physical address. It has the paid sick leave, how you will be providing paid sick leave to your employee. Yes, that is required by law. It goes over your workers' comp information, your paydays. It also goes over the amount that the individual will actually be paid. So you need to make sure that you are filling this out. There's that page 2 of the notice to employee does have a signature line. I always make a copy of that. Let the employee keep that for themselves, because if they ever need that workers' comp information or want to know about their paid sick leave or want to know what their regular rate of pay is going to be or what paydays they have, it's a lot of information to be received the first day of work. So it can be a bit overwhelming for an employee, and they're like, what date did they tell me again that I'm going to get paid? And I don't really want to ask because that's going to make me look bad. So give them this packet so that they have it. Okay. All right. So now that you have onboarded your employee, you're going to provide them with their beautiful employee handbook. And employee handbooks are an amazing tool. They are not actually required by law, but they are so, so important. The only issue with employee handbooks that we find are having policies that are not actually compliant with the law. And if you have an employee handbook, you should be reviewing it at least on an annual basis. Things change every single year. Every year, some law changes, and it's going to require you to change something in your employee handbook. So why do you need an employee handbook? Well, if you don't have an employee handbook, how do your employees know what rules they need to follow? How are you going to enforce those rules if they don't know that there are rules? A lot of our clients will call and say, it's common sense. Yes, I know. But common sense is not so common. And we actually had a specific client that called and said, we gave them their schedule and we told them what time they had to be at work. And 8 o'clock was their start time, 8 a.m. And they showed up at 8:30. And we're like, well, why are you late? Oh, I thought you were just giving me a time. I didn't know I had to be there at 8 a.m. I thought that's just the time you wanted me to work. Yes, that is the time we wanted you to work. So why did you not show up at 8 a.m.? And so I'll ask, well, what do you have in your employee handbook? And they're like, no, you've got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me. No, I know. It's not, common sense isn't always super common. So you have to set rules. And people honestly thrive when they are given boundaries and restrictions and rules to follow. If they don't know what the guidelines are, you can't reasonably expect that they're just going to know. It also helps you inform employees about the different benefits that you offer. There are specific rules and regulations and requirements by law that you have to do. And so your employee handbook gives you another avenue to say, yes, we did provide this information to the employees. So, come on. Some of the other required sections that you will have in an employee handbook are commission agreements, bone marrow and organ donation leave. And these, you guys, are all different sections that are triggered by the number of employees that you have in the workplace often. There are many laws that are, if you have one employee or more, this covers it. But there are certain laws and leaves and things that you would have to provide if you have a certain number of employees. We'll kind of go over that a little bit more too. The workers' comp information, I know you put it on the nose to employee, and a lot of this seems redundant, but you have to put those things in your employee handbook as well. Safety information, where they go in the event of an emergency, who do they need to call, their rules of conduct, confidentiality agreements, cell phone usage, and driving in the workplace. If your employee is going to be driving for you, if you have company vehicles, those are all things, because you'd be amazed, they got a ticket when they were driving for you and you don't have a company vehicle policy in your handbook. And you assume that they're just going to follow the law if they're driving in a vehicle, and they were insurable. So you assume that they do, but they didn't know that they had to wear their seatbelt when they were driving for you. They thought maybe that was their free pass. You have to put those kinds of things in the employee handbook. Some of the other sections that you most certainly want to put in are compensation practices. Exempt and non-exempt employees. That's kind of the two separated categories that you're going to have. While you may have some sections that say temp employees or commissioned or salespeople or a variety of different part-time, full-time, what that it actually is, boils down to, that's fine having those, but it really comes down to exempt and non-exempt employees. Now, exempt categories. I always bring this up in any time I'm talking about the word exempt, and it's because it's so frequently confused. And it's not really any employer's fault. It used to be very acceptable that if you paid an individual enough that they could be a salaried exempt employee, and that you would not have to worry about calculating overtime. And that was kind of the benefit of it. And that's not the case in this day and age. There are 5 exempt categories. That includes the exempt managerial, the computer professional exemption, the administrative exemption, the salesperson exemption, and the professional exemption. I got a call one time from an employer, and we were discussing some issues that they were having with a specific employee. And I said, well, so what are you wanting to do? And they're like, well, I don't know, but it's really hard because they're a salaried employee. And I said, okay, so what is their position? What's their title? And they're like, oh, well, they're our janitorial person. They do our maintenance and they kind of, clean up and do those kinds of things. And I'm like, okay, so you said they're salaried. So how are you keeping track of their hours? And they're like, no, we don't. We just pay them enough money and then we're good to go. And I'm like, okay, well, how much are you paying this person? $50,000 a year. So there's 2 parts that are wrong with that. A is that the individual who is a janitorial employee would not actually qualify as an exempt individual by the state because they don't fit in one of those 5 categories. The second is that the outside of a salesperson position, if they're falling under the salesperson exemption, every other category that's listed here on the screen has to be paid 2 times the minimum wage based on a 40-hour work week. So right now, the minimum wage is $15.50 an hour in the state of California. And there are some areas that you have a higher minimum wage based on the locality. But as a state general, $15.50 is the minimum wage. That means that you have to pay at least $31 an hour times 40 times a year in order to, which boils down to, I think this year is $64,800 is the bare minimum that you can pay an exempt employee annually. So that is why that individual who had the janitorial employee, it has someone who is not qualified to be an exempt employee, and 2, isn't being paid enough either. So you want to make sure that you evaluate those policies and make sure that you're putting enough thought, and keep in mind every year the minimum wage, at least for the last how many years, minimum wage has gone up. So you want to make sure that as you're increasing minimum wage, you're also evaluating your exempt salaried employees and make sure that they are being paid the right amount of money, at least the minimum. Some of the other sections that you want to put in include the pay days. I know it's on the notice to employee, but you want to have it in there as well. Reporting time pay, vacation, and holidays, if you're going to provide holidays. Vacation and holidays are not required by law. You don't have to observe any holiday. You don't have to pay employees for specific holidays. And vacation is also something that's not required for you to provide. If you choose to do so, you're doing so in a way to really remain competitive. It's very common. It seems almost second nature in this day and age to provide vacation and holiday pay. And the reason being is just because of the competitive market for employees. You really want that edge. You've got to provide more benefits and more perks, more reasons that the individual wants to work for your company. Some of the other benefits that you want to add into that employee handbook include sick pay and domestic violence leave, vacation or PTO, if you have it, a PTO policy and you encompass your paid sick leave with your vacation. That is a common thing as long as it meets the minimum accrual rate that paid sick leave has to meet, which is 1 hour for every 30 hours worked. Health insurance, if you provide health insurance, of course, you do want to provide some information about that in your employee handbook. If you have 50 employees, full-time equivalent employees or more, you are obligated to provide a health insurance plan. So be mindful of that and make sure that you have that policy in your employee handbook so employees are aware of what benefits are available to them. Retirement plans. This is a big one because this has changed. So many smaller businesses were impacted by this as the state passed something that's called CalSavers. And CalSavers is they say it's a free plan by the state, but there is a lot of legwork that goes into it. So if you have 5 or more employees, you have 2 options. You either have to enroll in a private retirement plan, and you want to give that information in the employee handbook, of course, or you have to enroll in CalSavers. And if you don't have a private retirement plan and you want to or have already enrolled in CalSavers, you just want to put some information in the employee handbook about the CalSavers plan and how an individual would be able to enroll in that. They do have to be offered that as well. Educational benefits, some employers will provide tuition reimbursement or will provide higher education because they want to encourage their employees to continue being a student. And that's a great thing to offer. It is not required by law, but if you do provide it, of course, you want to put that in your employee handbook so the employee can see that that is a potential benefit to them. Of course, some of the other elements, Social Security, SEI, paid family leave, workers' comp, unemployment, all of those are elements that you want to make sure you touch on in your employee handbook. Leave laws. Okay. This is one of the most convoluted sections, I would say, in labor law in total, especially in the state of California. The importance on this is so great. I can't even begin to explain to you because employees have so much available to them when it comes to leaves of absences. There are eligibility requirements, and you do need to outline those in your employee handbook. If you're not putting these kinds of things in your employee handbook, you need to make sure that the employees are given this information one way or another. So the Family Medical Leave Act provides for 12 weeks of coverage, and so does the California Family Rights Act. Those 2 leave laws used to be very, very similar and would often be referred to interchangeably. FMLA is a federal law, and the California Family Rights Act obviously is a state law. I always say that the state of California likes to one-up the federal government because they really do pretty frequently. And so they did that. in 2021, the California Family Rights Act moved from 50 employees, which is what you see here under FMLA. That is still in place for the federal government, but the California Family Rights Act reduced that threshold to employers who have 5 or more employees, which is hugely impactful. And the reason I put such emphasis on this is because those employers who have only 5 employees may not annually update their employee handbook. It would be understandable that they may have not had time. They're too busy focusing on their business. But it's hugely impactful because 1, you have to make sure that you put those provisions in your employee handbook. And 2, if an individual or if an employer has only 5 employees and they have an eligible employee who goes out on leave, you have to provide job protected leave for up to 12 weeks, and you just lost 20% of your workforce, which is hugely impactful. And I'm not saying it's fair, I'm just saying that's what the law is. So you want to make sure that you put those provisions in your employee handbook. Our employee handbook used to have FMLA, CFRA kind of combined. And where there are a little bit of differences, we would outline this is for CFRA only, this is for FMLA. Now we have 2 different sections because the state government one-ups the federal government, and now they're 2 completely different sections. Just to give you guys a little example of how in-depth our handbooks are. I know it seems almost annoying. I get annoyed reading them sometimes, but the FMLA section is about 3 pages long, and the CFRA section is about 3 pages long. That used to be 3 pages combined, now it's 6 because there are so many differences between FMLA and CFRA. You want to provide in addition bereavement. That is an added element. If you didn't provide funeral leave or bereavement previously, and you have 5 or more employees, you have an obligation to provide unpaid funeral leave of up to 5 days. And that's on an annual basis. So you want to make sure you put that in there. Jury duty, school leave, military, personal leave, all of those elements, if you have them, you have to put them in. If your company has the threshold of employees that I'm speaking of, and it's obligated for you to recognize it, then you have to put those elements in your handbook, okay? Some minor things that are very important are dress codes. What do you expect employees to wear? They need to know. Otherwise, they're going to show up and you're not going to be happy with what they're wearing, but there's not going to be an expectation of what you told them they had to wear. Maybe you verbally told them, but you want to have it written, because if you have it written, then you can discipline someone for being out of dress code. Resignations, letting them know we'll pay you out for your vacation once you're no longer working for us. We appreciate or would love for you to provide us a 2-week notice. You cannot require that, again, of course, because that would jeopardize at will. We see that a lot. Taglines that will say, we require 2-week notice. I'm like, well, you just jeopardize at will right there. You can't require them to give you a certain amount of time or notice prior to their exit from your company. Severance and non-competes. If you have an issue with a competitive workplace where you're fearful that someone's going to leave and go to somewhere else that's going to compete with you, you should talk to your legal counsel, as they will be able to give you information as to what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. There are a lot of employers who want to non-compete, but there's limitations and restrictions as to how much you can actually limit an employee's learnings from their workforce that they did with you. If they worked for you and they learned some things along the way, to say they can't take it with them would be difficult to obviously take away. So some of the potential pitfalls, just as we get towards the end of this program, are if you don't do it right, you're setting yourself up for failure. There's so much liability in having policies that are not legal. Just to kind of, because I know we're getting a little bit short on time, there's a quick workers' comp story. So I had a client send me their employee handbook, and they said, just review it. We know it's a solid handbook, but we just want to make sure everything is compliant in there and that we're not missing anything. And so after reading it, I asked them, you have a section in your employee handbook that covers workers' comp. And the workers' comp section specifically said that we will try to hold your position for you if you are injured at work. And if you're eligible for FMLA, then we will have job protected leave for up to 12 weeks. And there was just so much wrong with it because workers' comp is a no-fault system. If an employee injures themselves at the workplace, you are not allowed to tell them that you're not going to hold their position for them unless they're eligible for FMLA. In addition, there isn't a 12-week threshold when it comes to workers' comp. An individual may have really hurt themselves badly. They may need surgery and may be out for 6 months. And you're not allowed to say, well, you ran out of FMLA, so we're going to go ahead, and you can't even exhaust FMLA when an individual is on a work-related injury and is out of the workplace. Okay, so you want to make sure that is an actual policy that was in a handbook that I reviewed. And you'd be amazed when I actually asked that client, they said, I had no idea that that's what was written. And so I asked who made the policy for them. And they said, well, we had it put together by another friend who did an employee handbook themselves, and they gave it to us. And so we just used it. We didn't even really look at the nuts and bolts of it all. And that's hugely potentially problematic. So you want to make sure that if you're putting something in place, review it, have your legal counsel review it, have us review it prior to putting it in place. Piecemeal handbooks. A lot of employers will say, oh, I know so-and-so, my buddy owns a business, just send me your handbook, just send me your handbook. And they'll put kind of sections and pieces, or they'll find sections online. I know I have to have this policy, I'm just going to throw this in there. We'll find sections that they're like, we had no idea. I'm sorry, I know that seems silly, we put that in place, but that employee handbook is now pieced together, and it may even be pieced by different industries. There are certain industries that have difference in terms of what you can and can't do. There's difference in overtime thresholds. There's differences in individuals who have filed an alternative work week with the state. They may have different overtime thresholds because of that. And if you didn't know that prior and you just use that handbook, you assume that that's what the overtime thresholds are. You've got to be very careful in taking elements and kind of piecing it together into one employee handbook, as you may find yourself in some trouble down the line. Okay. And then lastly, review your employee handbook. Review it at least annually. Like I was mentioning, there's been so many laws that have passed in the last couple of years, and it has been largely impactful in what you need to change in your employee handbook. So you want to make sure that you're reviewing them often, and when something changes in law, make sure that you're updating your handbook accordingly. Okay?
Great.
All right.
Fantastic, Tiffany. Thank you. We do have one question that came through from one of our attendees. It was regarding the application and interview process under the don't ask laundry list of things you can't ask any longer. However, this question is in a financial position, or when somebody is applying for a financial position, they need to know if they have had any convictions on money-related transgressions. So how can you ask somebody if they're, let's say the employer is bonded, or they have a fiduciary responsibility to their clients or whatnot, how can you vet those folks that have had convictions in a financial matter?
Yes, and that is a fantastic question. Thank you so much for asking. So when I'm speaking in generalities across the board from a labor law perspective. If you have a position that is sensitive in nature, there are certain positions such as working with children, financial positions, you have to be very cautious about, and you need to know that that people's money is going to be safe and that our children are going to be safe if they are going to be working with this individual. You are allowed to run a background check after you've given a conditional offer of employment. So what you want to do, you're not going to inquire about their, their financial instability, stability, what have you. You won't necessarily ask that in the interview process. And I know this is hard. This is the hardest part of it, is you don't want employees or candidates, I should say, you don't want to have to waste their time, and you don't want your time to be wasted either. So you'd rather just get it out there. Hey, this is going to be a financial position. Are we going to have any problems? But you want to be very cautious in inquiring about things prior to giving a conditional offer of employment. Once you give that conditional offer of employment, you can run a background check. It's going to show whether or not they pass. And I always say to we use a third party because there are certain things you're not allowed to know, but there, of course, are certain things that you have to know if they're going to be in those kind of positions. So after you give that conditional offer, you're good to go. You can run a background check, and that will give you all the answers you need.
Okay, so that would be the same for, let's see, so you give them a conditional offer, and this offer is conditioned on the successful passing of the background check. Yeah. Can you do the same with drug test?
Same thing. So you can't ask them, and that is a great point. If you and some employers actually do pre-employment drug screening, and that's completely legal. You're allowed to have a drug-free workplace. So you can actually run a pre-employment drug test, but you have to give them an offer.
Okay.
So you just need to give them the offer of employment. You don't want to say, ooh, we have 5 candidates, let's run drug tests on all of them and see which one we're going to choose. You're going to give the one that you really want. If you're only hiring for one position, you're going to offer a job. Hey, we do a pre-employment drug test. As long as you pass that, we're offering you the position. Great. They agree. They have to sign off on it, of course. And then they go take their drug test. As long as those results come back clean and clear, then they're hired. And you wouldn't, after they pass it, say, we're going to go ahead and take that away. You would be taking it away if they don't pass that drug test, or if they don't pass the background check, for example.
Okay, I'm asking all the questions because everybody, and Steve, I think your question was answered. What if it's a technical job, and I know there's, some big companies out there that will actually make the applicant do an online test, so to speak, to see if they're even qualified for this job. Is that something that, as a smaller employer, they can require prior to the job offer?
Yeah, so you can do some pre-employment testing, or part of the application process is just getting a little bit of base knowledge of what they actually know. You can inquire that way. If you're having them come in and do an interview and you want to give them a paper pencil, here, can you fill out this questionnaire? We just kind of want to test your knowledge and see where you're at. What you don't want to do is, and we hear this very frequently too, and you just need to know you're not allowed to do it, is, let's say, for example, you want to know if you're in a grocery store and you're hiring for a cashier position. And you say, you know what, why don't we just throw you on the cash register and see how you do? And that would kind of give us the information. Well, now they're actually doing work for you. That's to the employer's benefit. Same thing for, let's say, a secretarial or administrative position, and you want to see how they file things. If you want to see how they would file something, give them a fake file that's not actually something you're going to benefit from, and say, thank you, you just did that work for us, let's put it away. Because now they're your employee, you actually hire them, you're having them do work for you, and it benefited you, and it's potentially big trouble. You just want to say, here's this file, we're not going to do anything with it. It's just our testing procedure to see kind of how you would actually file something if we were to bring you on.
Okay, I'm just curious, are there companies out there, let's say you're hiring for a secretarial position here, I'm dating myself, how many words a minute can you type, right? When we used to be able to ask that question, is there a program, you throw them on a computer, say go, and they got to click, see how many words they got wrong, and can you use that? I don't even know if people do that.
Right.
That's
so
just an example.
Yeah.
Is there places out
you know
there?
what? I would love to know how many words a minute I can type too, actually, in this day and age. But you know what? The backspace, because I type really fast. But you can inquire about those kinds of things. You just want to be cautious in each and every procedure you're using, that you're not going to create an unintentional bias or find out down the line that you unintentionally said, that could have been something that was protected, such as they may have some type of disability. You don't want to show that disability in their, application process, because if you're unintentionally having biases against them, and that's where it becomes a slippery slope. So if you have a pre-employment, like, here's the test we want to give, you just have to be cautious in doing so, and making sure that it's very neutral, that it's not in any way, shape, or form discriminatory, and that it's not going to allow for you to create a bias prior to giving them an opportunity of employment.
Okay, great. Does anybody else have any questions for Tiffany? And I'm going to put in the chat, I'm going to put your contact info. I know it's right there also, but in the chat, you could actually just grab it. But Tiffany's a wealth of knowledge in the HR world. It's really tough to navigate that world if you're trying to run your business, you're trying to do everything correct, and it just seems like you can't keep up with everything. So Tiffany, if you don't mind, I'm gonna have you not share your screen.
Yeah. Oh yeah. How do I hold on? Let me stop sharing. Or can you? Let's see. Let me. Oh, it's up here. Here we go. Stop share.
Perfect. Fantastic. Okay, so now I am going to give the meeting over to Jenna Welch. She's our communications director at the Clovis Chamber of Commerce, and she's going to talk about some of the changes that we're going to be making to our Wake Up Clovis program.
Thank you, Greg. And thank you so much for the presentation. I feel like this is just wonderful information for our small businesses to know and keep up on. So thank you, Tiffany, for that presentation. Yeah. We are super excited that we are moving our Wake Up Clovis series to in-person. So starting next month on April 12th, we will be in person at Clovis Community College Herndon campus, room 308. And our speaker will be Rich Moster with the Community Small Business, or Valley Community Small Business Development Center. So he's going to be talking about the basics on starting a small business. Again, that's April 12th. We're just very excited to be back in person, so we hope to see you all there. We have a couple other events coming up. So on March 15th, we have our Big Hat Days Mixer. That'll be a really fun one. Lunch Connect is on March 22nd at DeChico's, and our Wind Down Wednesday is at 13 Pine Steak, and that'll be March 29th. And then, of course, our Big Hat Days is coming up April 1st and 2nd. So we just have a lot going on, and we're just so happy you joined us this morning. We will send out a link following this presentation with the registration for the next Wake Up Clovis, as well as all of our other events. So please be sure to register for that. And we're looking forward to seeing everybody bright and early on April the 12th.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jenna. One other change is as a Clovis Chamber member benefit, like today's program and the ones in person, they will be free if you are a active Clovis Chamber member. If you are not, the cost is going to be how much, Jenna?
It's $15 for non-members.
How much is it?
15.
15 for non-members. But it's still free for members, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so it's another, like I said, a benefit to your membership. You still do need to register. So like Jenna said, everybody will be getting that link and subsequent links. So make sure you click that link and register. And there'll be coffee and treats and great speakers. So we're looking forward to you. Okay, that's it. Tiffany, thank you so much again for your time. If you need to if you want to watch this, it will be up on our YouTube channel probably within a week. So you can watch it again in case you weren't taking notes, and we appreciate your time again. Thank you.
Thank you. You guys have a great day. Thank you for having me.
Very good. Thank you, Tiffany.